Greetings, I am Mr. O'Neill and I teach English Language Arts online for Stride K12. I also coach chess as well as a few other esports for Stride K12, and what a time to be alive for the K12 Esports League. The playoffs are well underway. All of the matches for the Elite Eight have concluded, as well as all of the Final Four matches have concluded, which means we know who will be in the championship round for the teal bracket and for the blue bracket, and let's take a look. In the blue bracket, as you can see in the quarterfinals, the Elite Eight, I Rickrolled You was heavily favored against a piggy bank 1391, and they won, and they moved on to the semifinals, and they faced against Budgie 10. Budgie 10 was able to defeat Cool 18 LP. Budgie 10 was the heavy favorite in that one as well. And Budgie 10 and I Rickrolled You were both highly rated, so it makes sense that they would meet one another in the semifinals. We'll take a look at the final game for I Rickrolled You and Budgie 10 to see how that went down, and we'll actually take a look at the final game for every Final Four match in both brackets. So on the bottom side of the blue bracket, you can see that Dr. Evaman 12 was able to beat the chess game FR in the Elite Eight in the quarterfinals to move on to the semifinals. And then Trocador, the Lemur Jedi, did get a win against Dream Angels 88 in their match. So Trocador, the Lemur Jedi, had an exciting game against Dr. Evaman 12 for their match in the Final Four. And we'll take a look at their last game as well. On the teal bracket side, you can see that Dead Zone 222 did make it into the semifinals after beating Rift Bando in the quarterfinals, and then King Saki XXIV was able to get past Heroes of Olympus in the quarterfinals, so Dead Zone 222 and King Saki had an interesting match that we'll take a look at. And then on the bottom side of the teal bracket, you'll see that Admiral Aqua was able to get by Greek Geek 58, and Heston defeated James 31-73-49, and Admiral Aqua and Heston had a very good game as well. Once again, we'll analyze the last game of every Final Four match for both brackets. Okay, so I Rickrolled You and Budgie 10. I Rickrolled You won game 1, so in this game, I Rickrolled You needs to win to get into the finals. Budgie 10 needs to win this game just to pull even 1-1. So let's see how this game went down. So I Rickrolled You with the white pieces starts with a Queen's opening and a London system, my favorite. And Budgie 10 responds with the Indian game and Bishop to D6, offering a trade, but not accepting the trade. I Rickrolled You hops into E5, and this is a book move, and the knight helps control the center. Black can always put this knight on D7 to challenge White's knight on E5, which is what happens in the game. And I Rickrolled You calmly develops their own knight to D2. The idea, of course, is if you get your knight to F3, then if takes, then you can just replace back with your knight, and you'll still have a knight on E5 no matter what. If you have enough time to get this knight over to F3, then you can just replace capture with another knight. We have castles. The pawn's going to develop to C4. This prevents any pins like this, preventing a bishop pin. Useful move. The bishop's going to develop, so the last minor piece for I Rickrolled You has finally been developed, and I Rickrolled You is ready to castle if they want to, but they're also staying flexible and potentially going to initiate a kingside attack if they don't castle kingside. And we have C5 right away, and I Rickrolled You calmly responds with H4. Let's get this kingside attack going. Takes, the knight has to move. So tempo on the knight. The queen's going to activate. This is a very good move. Queen is activated to H5. And then we have F5. You might be thinking, well, why not just G6? And this is weakening because G6 weakens the dark squares. And now the queen can hop into here, and then the bishop wants to come in to put pressure on the queen, and then the bishop wants to sneak their way in here. I mean, the knight is covering, but then that you'd sacrifice a knight for a pawn, and then you're really losing. So this is very weakening, and white is almost +3 in this position because you're weakening all of your dark squares. So that's why g6 was not played in the game. Instead, we have f5, and I rook rolled. You could have taken en passant here, but declining en passant because it's better to get the knight hopped in, and the engine actually really likes knight to f3 because that's a strong move. Pretty accurate game, by the way, for I rook rolled you. They were close to 90. I think they were 88 or 89 accuracy for this game. So g4, trying to challenge the center and weaken black's position on the king side. So we have takes. The rook is going to lift, but the queen's going to infiltrate. The bishop actually wanted to get into g6, according to the engine, but queen to g6 is a perfectly fine move. There's nothing wrong with queen to g6. It's still maintains the advantage for white, but the engine really likes bishop to g6, attacking the rook. So queen to g6 is what happens in the game. Queen has to slide back with the tempo that the knight had on it, and then bishop developing to d7, finally trying to get that last rook activated. And then the engine really likes taking the pawn here with the bishop, because you can't actually retake because of the pin. So I'm not sure if I rook rolled you saw that in the game or not, but because of the pin, X-ray vision through the pawn, the bishop cannot be captured after it takes on h6. So that would have been a strong move, but instead we do have bishop to g6. It's not as strong this time because the knight is covering. In the previous position that we analyzed, the knight was not on f8. So if you go back a couple of moves to this position, the knight is not on f8. So bishop to g6 is pretty strong. But now that the knight is on f8, it's not quite as good of a move because the knight can just capture, which is what happens in the game, and then recaptures with the queen. Bishop's going to activate, and then in this position, the engine actually really likes a rook lift to h3. The engine thought about rook lifting to h3 for a minute, and then you can castle or put the king on d2. Either way, d2, your king is kind of exposed because this file could open up. And if this file opens up, then your king's in a bad spot on d2. So, but yeah, castling would probably be fine as well. And the idea is just to get this rook lifted, and then you can start advancing this pawn and start putting more pressure. Or your other rook can come to g1, and then you've got both rooks on both of these files helping with the attack on the king, is the idea, once you get castled. Okay, the next move that we have is knight to g5. And it looks like the knight is being sacrificed because after takes, it's just a temporary sacrifice, and then the rook on h1 is opened up to help with this kingside attack. Now, the engine says that this move is a mistake. If black defends correctly, it's a 50-50 position. However, when I analyzed this with the engine not using review, if I just clicked on this magnifying glass, not doing the full review process, it actually saw it as a brilliant move to begin with. But then if you click on review and then go through the review process, then it sees it as a mistake instead of a brilliant move. Go figure. But I actually think it's more accurately viewed as a brilliant move than a mistake, because you're opening up the rook on the h file, and it's going to be really difficult for black to defend here. Takes is what happens in the game, and then the knight is going to sacrifice itself on f6, and this is really where black lost their advantage. So before knight to f6, it was a 50-50 even game for the most part. I mean, white is maybe plus a 1.5, which isn't much, 1.6, so that's like 1.5 pawns that white has the advantage of, and by g10 is +2 in material. So if Budgie 10 plays their cards correctly here, it's going to be hard for white to convert. And, I mean, the engine is saying queen to c7 helps maintain equality for white, because the idea is you got to give your king some luft to run. Like the king wants to get to e7 to run, right? So queen here, then like let's see, you've got check here, check, king's going to escape. And then now this is a 50-50 game. So it's hard for white to make progress. And black might actually be slightly for choice here because they're +2 in material. So unfortunately for Budgie 10, they did not see that idea in the game to create some luft for black by getting the queen out of the way. So what happens is Budgie 10 tries to create luft. The idea is if you sacrifice some material, then you can open up the position and maybe get some counterplay. But takes, now you're sacrificing your rook, takes. Now white could take the queen here as well. And then this would still be a fine position for white. You're +5, you're +4 in material, and you're +5 according to the engine on the evaluation. But I rook rolled, you did not actually go for the queen trade. Instead, what happened in the game is takes, goes back to try to get this check and then win this rook, because that would be a nasty check and then you're losing a rook. So the rook's going to slide over, check, king moves. Let's put some pressure on the queen. Again, the pawn cannot take the rook because of the pin. So the queen has to move, and then takes with check, takes. The rook has to move because the rook was being attacked by the pawn. And then the rook is going to eventually sacrifice itself by taking the bishop. I rook rolled you was already +3 in this position. So I rook rolled you calculated that they can get some good counterplay by sacrificing, because after takes, black has a very weakened pawn structure of tripled pawns. This is going to be extremely difficult for black to defend. The material is only +1 in favor of white, but the engine evaluation is almost +6 in favor of white, because these tripled pawns are so difficult for black to defend, and white's going to eventually win a couple of them back. So we have check, which is forking the king and the a7 pawn, but I rook rolled you doesn't really care about the a7 pawn too much, so check again, and then takes. I rook rolled you's happy to exchange rooks off the board because white has a stronger position in terms of pawn structure, and locking down this pawn on a5, which is a dark square. The bishop is a dark squared bishop. It's going to control the dark squares. The bishop can jump in and take that a5 pawn if it wants to, but no rush. So king's going to centralize, and the king has to go back. You're putting black in zugzwang here. So zugzwang means any move that black makes is a poor move. So if you move the pawn, you're just the bishop's going to take the pawn. And if you move your king to any square, then you're losing this. So the king goes back, takes, lost a pawn. You're in zigzwang. You didn't have any other good moves. Takes. Pawn's putting some pressure on the bishop. Bishop has to go back. Takes. So black is going to try to get this pawn to promote to a queen, but the bishop is blockading the pawn. So white has a pretty clear advantage here. And now there goes the other pawn. Takes. So now it's a bishop and 2 pawns against just black's king. And then it's mate and 7 from here. Eventually, I rook rolled you does get checkmate, and that's the game. And I rook rolled you wins the match 2-0, and I rook rolled you advances into the finals. Very good game from Budgie 10. I've only played Budgie 10 twice all time, and I've lost to Budgie 10 both games. So Budgie 10 is a very strong player, and good luck on the rest of your chess career, and good luck on the rest of your chess season. On the bottom side of the blue bracket, we had Dr. Evaman 12 and Trocador the Lemur Jedi. Dr. Evaman 12 got the win in game 1. So this is game 2, and Trocador the Lemur Jedi needs a win to bring the series even 1-1 and force a game 3. Dr. Evaman 12 needs a win with the black pieces in order to win the series 2-0, and then Dr. Evaman 12 can go into the championship game against I rook rolled you. So let's see what happened in this game. And Trocador the Lemur Jedi starts with a king's opening, takes, and we have a Scandinavian from black, which I like to play the Scandinavian from when I have the black pieces as well. And this is actually pretty standard Scandinavian stuff, putting the queen on a5. And then takes, that's a good move because the pawn was undefended. The knight's going to hop in, threatening a fork. The knight's trying to fork the king and the rook by capturing on c7. So black has to defend c7 somehow. And they choose to go knight to a6 to defend c7 from behind. And again, black can't just take the knight because the bishop's defending the knight. So this is kind of an odd move, putting your bishop in front of your pawn like this. Usually you don't want your bishop in front of your pawn in the middle of the board like this. So kind of an unusual move from the Lunar Jedi. And kicking the knight away, so the knight has to move back. The queen's going to move back. This is pretty standard, putting your queen back on d6 in these Scandinavians. Sometimes when the queen, remember the queen was originally on a5, sometimes in these Scandinavian positions, when the queen's on a5, if they get kicked again, the queen will slide back to b6 to try to keep an eye on this pawn, or the queen could slide all the way back to its original starting square on d8. So those are a couple of other potential squares that the queen likes to go to in these Scandinavian positions, because I play the Scandinavian all the time. So knight develops to f3 and castles. Bishop's going to go to g4 and kicking the bishop, so the bishop has to move back. Bishop's going to slide back to provide some extra protection on the knight. And we have some more developing moves, castles from black. And the rook's going to activate to b1, which is a semi-open file. Queen slides back, takes. You also have another semi-open file right here for these rooks to activate. And bishop's going to put some pressure on the knight. Of course, the queen has to move because it was being attacked. Takes, but now you're trapping the bishop potentially because of, well, it looks like you're trapping the bishop, but not quite, because that's actually a blunder because the rook's defending. Usually in these positions, the rook is on a1. So if the rook is on a1, then you would be trapping the bishop because the queen's attacking the bishop, and if the bishop takes, then the queen can take. But the rook's not on a1, the rook's on b1, so the rook's defending the bishop here. So nice move to take the pawn. Takes. Nice fork, and the rook is defending the knight, who's forking both rooks. Fork. Queen moves. And now the engine is saying taking this rook because you're hitting the queen. You could potentially take this rook as well. But so we have takes. Rook's gonna put some pressure on the bishop. Bishop has to slide back. Queen slides back to get out of the way of the bishop. Takes. And remember, Dr. Evenman 12 is +3. They're up by a minor piece here. So, well, they're up by the equivalent of a minor piece. They have a rook for a bishop. So they just need to start exchanging pieces, and then they'll get the win. And these pawns are disconnected for white, and these pawns are connected for black. So white has 3 pawn islands, 1, 2, 3 pawn islands. Black only has 2 pawn islands. So takes. Rook's going to start going after these pawns. And now the rooks have doubled up. Takes. And all these exchanges are just helping black end the game faster. So takes. Nice sacrifice to help the game end a little bit faster. And again, check. There goes another pawn. And you can see that black's pawns are just marching down the board, and they'll queen eventually. White's disconnected pawns on the queen's side eventually came back to bite them. So there's check again, and eventually gets checkmate. So nice job from Dr. Evaman12 to get the checkmate, and they will face I Rook Rolled You in the finals for the blue bracket. Good game to Trocador the Lemur Jedi. They had a very good season. They won a lot of games, and they impressed me, and Trocador the Lemur Jedi will only get better as time goes on. In the teal bracket, King Saki and Dead Zone 222 each won a game. So this is game 3. Whoever wins game 3 will win the match and advance to the finals in the teal bracket. So this is for all the marbles. So we have a King's Opening and Scandinavian response from black, which we've seen before. Check. The more usual move is to put the queen on a5 like we analyzed in the last game. And then white's going to develop, and that is a fork. So black has to move the queen out of the way. Oh, probably could have taken the bishop there. I mean, it makes sense because you're afraid that you're going to lose a pawn, but the idea from the engine is takes, and then just move the rook over to attack the queen. And then the queen has to move out of the way. The engine is saying sacrifice the queen here, but you don't want to sacrifice the queen, really. I mean, that because the knight's defending the rook from behind. So like maybe move out of the way. But then you've got knight comes in here, threatening this. Queen has to go back to defend against this. And then you're going to take. And then takes. And then now the bishop's coming in. And look at this position. White has 1, 2, 3, 4 minor pieces developed compared to 0 minor pieces developed for black. 4 minor pieces developed for white, 0 minor pieces developed for black. So this is +6 according to the engine evaluation. So a really, really strong position for white. But they did not go into this line. But you could have gone into that line. So we have pawn to g3 to defend against the queen taking. So the bishop moves out of the way. Knight's going to hop in to attack the queen. And now takes. Bishop's going to activate. Takes. Bishop's going to put some pressure on the queen. Queen has to go back. Takes. Queen is going to activate to d2, block the check with the bishop. Let's get some attack on the rook. You can see one of the mistakes that King Saki is making here in this game is they are just moving their queen all over the board. This bishop is not developed. This knight is not developed. This rook is nowhere close to being developed. Versus Dead Zone 222 has already developed this, and this, and this, and this. So Dead Zone 222 is a lot more developed here. So blocking the attack, and then castling kingside. That wins the queen immediately because the queen is pinned against the king. So takes, and King Saki has found a really nice winning tactic here. So King Saki went from a losing position to a winning position immediately because they found the royal pin. Bishop pinning the queen against the king. And there goes a pawn, there goes a rook, there goes a knight, there goes a bishop, and King Saki is winning by 18 points here. And so it's just a matter of eventually gobbling everything else up and eventually delivering checkmate, which this is move 32. And by move 46, they eventually get another queen and deliver checkmate. So King Saki does get the win in game 3 against Dead Zone 222, and King Saki will move on to the championship round in the teal bracket, and they will face the winner of this game, Admiral Aqua and Heston. Admiral Aqua and Heston each won a game, so this is game 3 to break the 1-1 tie. whoever wins game 3 would face King Saki in the championship round for the teal bracket. So let's see how this game 3 plays out between Admiral Aqua and Heston. And Heston is the favorite because they are higher rated, but don't count out Admiral Aqua quite yet because they've had some good games recently. And nice move to put some extra defense on the knight. And I actually probably would have made this move as well, or bishop to e2 to defend the knight with the bishop. Either way works. And takes. And it's a nice idea from Admiral Aqua to keep the queen on d1 for the time being. And it's a nice idea to keep the bishop on this diagonal with the blue arrow instead of putting the bishop on f3. If you would have retaken with the bishop, say you had the bishop on e2 and then you retake on f3, but instead you just replaced your knight. So really nice idea from Admiral Aqua. And I actually really like this position for white. And white's also keeping long-term potential pressure on this c7 square. So bishop's going to develop, knight's going to attack the bishop. So takes, castles. Queen's going to slide over to a6, takes. Now black has a very weak pawn structure on the a file with those doubled pawns. So Heston has to be really careful with those doubled pawns. So the knight's going to activate, then other knight's also going to activate. There is a fork. So Admiral Aqua is going to lose a rook. And takes. Now Heston is winning this position by 2 points. And it's just a matter of converting the position to a win. Rooks are stronger than knights. Takes. The white pawn structure on the king side has solidified, but this g2 pawn is weak. Check. Exchanging rooks off the board. Now it's a rook against a knight, and black also has an extra pawn. So normally it would just be +2, a rook and a knight, but because black has an extra pawn, it's +3. So, and there goes the knight, because the knight was not being defended, and now it's +6. So now it's just a matter of gobbling up these other pawns. There goes a pawn. There goes another pawn. There goes another pawn. So it's +8 for Heston. And it's just a matter of getting some of these pawns converted into queens, which eventually happens, and we have checkmate. So Heston won game 3. Heston will play against King Saki in the finals for the teal bracket. And good game from Admiral Aqua. They had a couple of mistakes, but they had a good season overall. And I'm sure we haven't seen the last of them. I'm sure Admiral Aqua will come back in the future. And they'll be back stronger than ever the next time that we see them. All right, so good game and good playoffs, and I can't wait to see the championship rounds for the teal bracket and for the blue bracket. And have a good rest of your day. Bye.